passing the syllabi around. Take one, and then we got plenty of choice. We can here and then. So I made a name tag for everyone who's registered in the course, and it's fine if you're shopping around. You know, 'cause sooner or later, someone with the same name will take a class with me sooner or later, right? But if you're an auditor who has permission, I didn't do it. I just because your name wasn't on it. So there's some blank ones at the end. So just write your name there. And also if you're just here, if you're shopping around. So this way, right? So sociology 30,224 is the number, right? That's where we all are here. Okay, so today we're going to be doing an organizational day. It's going to be a little different from how we usually do it. Usually we have two parts, and one of us will chair one part and one the other. But today it's going to be more like we're going to do organizational stuff, and then we'll just start talking because we're going to refresh you on the classics, and we'll argue because, I mean, the funny, like, Terry and I, we don't just have a mutual admiration society, but we really like the way each other think, which is why this is fun, but we also disagree, and the funnest part for me about the class are the arguing parts. Yeah. But we're also going to take a break every day at 10-minute break from 4:50 to 5 o'clock, which is exactly in the middle, and it divides it into two 1-hour and 20-minute sessions, so that's the same as if we had two times. But we'll start again right at 5. We'll always start right at 5 sharp. So I think what we're going to do, if I have this correctly, we're going to give a really brief thumbnail. Hey, Max, a really brief thumbnail about the structure of the course and the object of the course, and then we're going to go around and have you say something about yourselves. Like, obviously not super long because it would really add up. Come on. Yeah.
We can just go to another classroom. Is there another chair anywhere?
I think we're fine. We got enough. I think we literally have one for every person who should be here.
One more.
Yeah, we're fine. Oh, we need one to hold it open. It doesn't have to be a chair that holds it open. It can be a garbage can. But we need to do two garbage cans because the first one will get pushed into the second will increase the friction with two. So we'll go around and we'll hopefully hear a little bit from each of you, like just what who you are, what you do, and then we want to go over. This is like in case you're not a sociologist, we're going to try to go over like your basic Marx, Weber, Durkheim, the big three in America, and because they do represent three traditions of sociology of culture. So like I think the we're trying to give you. What's that? What are you doing? Are you filming me? Did you?
I'm from Hollywood.
You
handle it well, and you've got potential to really go somewhere.
Okay. If anyone doesn't want to be filmed or recorded, let us know, and we will destroy these things. If you want. Okay. I'll try to dress up a little better next time. That's pretty good. So I want to say a little bit about the course, the way we've been thinking about it, because last time we did it, we ripped it apart and redid it with this idea of like, let's walk through the generations, right? And I think one of the reasons why is because, Terry's a really good historian of theory, and it naturally, I think, makes sense for us to follow the way in which one generation is responding to another, and it works, I think, especially well for those for whom some of this stuff is really new. We will try to go over like some of the greatest hits of like what is sociology of culture right now in ways that we think are especially useful for people who are working on projects that are culture adjacent, right? And we hope that this is going to be of use to people who are doing projects that are either in the sociology of culture or culture adjacent. And we're also going to try to contextualize some of those things. And well, Terry's going to try to contextualize. I'm not as good at that. So before we start going around to hear who everybody is, are there questions? Oh, last thing, yes, there is a question, which is, what is the main thing that you're evaluated on? Well, in addition to obviously coming and participating, we do always want to hear from everybody, but understand that not everybody is going to want to talk every day. That's totally fine. That you're going to do something, and it's going to be either like a paper or a test. The test thing sounds weird, but for bureaucratic reasons, the sociology PhD students need to have an exam grade. That exam grade can be based on a paper, but if they don't have a paper they want to do, we will also make up an exam. But if you're going to do a paper option, you can do something that is specific to this class. So you could write something that's like more of like a typical classroom paper where you're analyzing people's ideas, but you can also do a version of your main project. If you're like a master's student and have a master's thesis, you want to write about what you know about bridging to culture, that's great. And if you want to do a proposal for a study that you're not actually going to do now that links to culture, that's also, I think, really exciting for us.
And you can imagine, propose, I have $1 million in your proposed budget, and that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Think big.
Yeah.
Maybe even $2 million if you want.
Yeah, well, because 50% of that is overhead that goes to us. So, because I think writing a proposal is often a really good way of clarifying what do you think is really going on, what matters, what doesn't matter. But are there questions on the organization of the course or anything like that? Okay, and if there are like more particular problems that you have, you could talk to us in the break. So let's go around for everyone. Say your name and like what your location is here. What brings you to the sociology of culture? And maybe Enzo will start with. I guess there's no real good way to. Enzo, start with you and start going around.
Hi everyone, I'm Enzo. I'm a PhD student in sociology, and I'm also interested in networks and health, and I think that networks are heavily connected to culture.
Can you hear him? Okay.
Yeah, pump it up. You're gonna have
So
to
I'm also interested in the sociology of culture, and I'm wondering how I could connect the social network aspect to cognition and culture.
Hi, I'm Selena. I'm a math student with a concentration in sociology. So I'm shopping for this class because I like theories, and I'm also doing my research on the linguistic landscape of Chicago Chinatown. So that also involves like symbols, images, culture as well. So.
Hi everyone, I'm Yu I'm in math sociology, and my thesis is about the vocationalization of higher education in China. And there's a part about like people's.
Sorry, what about higher education?
Vocationalization.
Vocational.
Yeah. So there's a part about people's value regarding what's the value of education and what's a kind of a good job should be, and I think that links to the idea of culture and cognition.
Mm-hmm.
Very much.
Hi, I'm Della. I'm a PhD student in the sociology program, and my research is based on higher education, particular bachelor STEM degrees, and like occupations and income resulting of that. And so from the 70s through now, really thinking about the cultural change that has happened or not, in regarding what expanding opportunities have been specifically for women.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm Jackie, and I'm a math student in sociology. My interest is focused on the collaborative development between organizations and how the external environment affects them. And I come for this class I saw it talk about some organizational theory
Mm-hmm.
Hi everyone, I'm Sijia. I'm a visiting PhD student. Actually, I'm a PhD student in psychology from Hong Kong. And my thesis topic is about how the societal level relational mobility changed the whole social network structure of the society, which have a downstream effect on their values, on people's values.
Good. Wait, hold on just one second. I'm catching up writing this stuff down. So social mobility has effects on network structure.
Residential mobility, how frequently people move
Mm-hmm.
or relocate, change the social network structure
Mm-hmm.
of the society, which may shift their values.
Okay. Gotcha.
I'm Ann Ford Coates. I am a MAPS sociology student. I'm researching the workforce that makes products for stage and screen. I work in opera, theater, television, film, and I'm researching the workforce as an example of precarious workers, like workers in the gig economy and non-standard employment.
Hi all, my name is Yang Yu and I'm a Max first year student. And my research interest is about social attitude and also cultural productions. So currently I'm working on some kind of the paintings, how the social network of artists will influence the paintings, these kind of questions.
Oh.
Hi everyone, I'm Shi Yang. I'm a first year PhD student in sociology. My interest is mostly surrounding non-human entities in society and how the fast evolving machines, particularly artificial intelligence, and how they reformulate the production process of culture and everything.
Hi all, my name is Ivan. I'm a first year PhD student in sociology also. My main interests lie in sociology of knowledge, but that's pretty much culture co-adjacent subfield, I think. So my research is primarily focused on knowledge production about Africa in the US and Soviet Union currently, but I also have broader interest of academic taste, scholarly taste, and so on. So it's culture related.
Hello everyone, my name is Erica. I'm a second year student in the computational social science program. My research interests are in microsociology, and I have a project on sort of using machine learning to elucidate the micro to macro emergence of social concepts, like social figures. And then actually I'm taking this class because I studied sociology, but I never studied culture specifically, and I feel like it's a pretty elusive concept. It's sort of like when you read the news and then you hear about the discrepancies between groups of people, and you think to yourself, oh yeah, there's a cultural difference. Or as a researcher, you step into a different, group of people and you're trying to study them, and you have to be aware of cultural differences. But then the funny thing is, just on the everyday, when we meet different people, and we don't really introduce ourselves with all of these components. I don't know. So it's something that I think I'm.
That's 100% where I'm hoping we're going to start today.
Okay.
It's exactly this. When does culture suddenly appear? And yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. Let's go around the wall and then jump back.
Okay. Hi, my name is Idan. I'm a math student in sociology interaction, and I'm interested in death market and digital ethnography.
Sorry, the what market?
Death.
Death?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. And I'm now working on my thesis. It's about online mourning on Instagram specifically. Yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Aaliyah. I'm a math sociology student, and my interests fall pretty squarely within the sociology of culture, particularly taste. And so my current research is looking at taste trajectories and values of people who listen to a particular subgenre of country music.
My name's Heather. I'm a math student in sociology, and I'm writing my thesis on kind of the entire world of firefighting and the culture of firefighters, somewhat as kind of as a total institution, and who is attracted to careers as first responders, and why, and then the meaning that's made in
So structural firefighters.
Well, I'm doing urban and
Yeah.
wildfire
Oh, okay.
and contract, so people that go to Antarctica,
Mhm.
Djibouti, and then volunteers also.
Very cool. Ben?
And I'm the second year max student, and I took this class because I'm writing a fiction about a sociology student and a Chinese factory worker, and I think I should know more about both of them. So I took this course.
Okay. Didn't see that one coming. Yeah.
Hi everyone, my name's Pierre. I'm a map sociology student, like many of us. And my research interest is mainly in conspiracy theories, as for a term that might be, and so like the evolution of conspiracy theories as belief systems, and the evolution of the conspiracy communities and their sort of belief systems, their culture. So I thought that might be relevant in that regard if we sort of step away from just thinking about beliefs, but like the broader set of values that characterize conspiracy communities.
Hi, my name is Ben. I'm a maps sociology student, and I'm interested in criminalization, criminalized identities, and cultures of criminalized subgroups.
I'm Aaron. I'm a second year PhD student in sociology and research mainly policing and the criminal legal system and urban sociology broadly, work with Robert Vargas mainly. And I'm taking this class as a requirement. I don't really use cultural sociology at all and haven't studied it previously, but I think it's a good opportunity in part because there's been a number of prominent manuscripts from sociologists who study policing who use like various cultural lenses to study policing culture and behavior, and so it's a good opportunity.
Hi, I'm Vincent. I'm a PhD student from computational social science at Copenhagen University, and my research is about digital political participation. And how interaction occurs on social media in political regimes. I'm joining the course also in order to. So I've always had an interest in cultural sociology, and of course it's somewhat culture adjacent, at least especially in the interaction sense, what I'm researching. And also I think it's just great to revisit like all the classics in a new perspective that I haven't read for 5 to 8 years or something, so it's all really nice.
Hi everyone, my name is Tia. I'm a math student, but actually from economics, so maybe I'm the only person in the classroom that outside sociology. My research interest lies in labor economics and health, and I'm taking this course because some of the reading lists in the syllabus that I encountered from the full quarter from another course, so I think I can try to focus.
Hello everyone, my name is Mike, and I'm first year PhD in history. So, and I'm studying Soviet and post-Soviet Russia, and particularly I'm doing cultural and social history, and I'm interested in the history of open-air markets, any kind of open-air trade, and the involvement of ordinary people in that trade. So, and I'm taking this course because, so I'm doing cultural and social history, and I all the time have this feeling that, and in history I think it's very common that you want to do some kind of interdisciplinary stuff, and you need to borrow the methods from sociology and anthropology, but you always feel that you are like imposter, you don't know the theory, you don't know many of the fundamental works, so and I want to just fill this gap.
Oh, hi, my name is Jia Xu, just call me JX. I'm a math student, concentration in sociology, so my background is also in sociology, but unfortunately I don't have like very specific training on the social theories, particularly in culture, because I'm quite interested in like sociology of culture in general. My interest is generally the overlapping field between the sociology of knowledge and culture, so it's like how layperson participated in the knowledge production and how the social culture is shaped by the our concept of the science in general. And also I'm interested in modern individualism. So I think it's quite important for me just to take this class about like foundational reading about this sociology of culture. My master's thesis is about individualistic spirituality online. Yeah, that's it.
My name is Minji, and I'm a maths sociology student, and I am doing research on international schools. That's like an elite secondary school in Asia, and how they conceive to control egalitarian ethos, but in the end they promote white hegemonic ideologies in their pedagogy, and how those Asians from wealthy family backgrounds become an active agent of reproducing this white hegemonic ideologies that is persisting across Asia.
I'm Alejandro. I'm a second year math student, so the computational thing, I guess. I do work in political sociology in intersection with cultural. I'm also interested in belief networks and political ideology and how those can be constructed via ground-up approaches, mostly via text.
Hi, I'm Anju. I'm also a second year math student. I'm interested in urban resilience after the pandemic. My thesis is on how the pandemic influenced like visitors' behaviors in urban green spaces and their preferences. I'm currently a research assistant for Professor Tark, and we are working on a proposal on the scene theory.
Hello everyone, my name is Muhua. My background is in computer science and psychology, and I study AI's personality, value, and also their social behaviors. I'm pretty new to sociology. This is my second course in and I'm taking it because a lot of my friends are here and also want to experience the Chicago School of Sociology.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Chi, and I'm a maths sociology student. My thesis, I guess I want to take a look at how scholars in different countries hold different perspectives on the same topic. For example, if we talk about Chinese immigrants, how scholars in the US, in China, in Japan would hold different perspectives when they write about such topic.
Which gets exactly work that both Xiang and Yvonne are doing. It's kind of cool. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Max from the Max program. I work on culture, and I don't know much about culture. I don't know what it is, so I want to be here. And I want to apologize because I have to leave at 5 o'clock, possibly every week. So, sorry.
Okay. Well, what is culture?
Okay.
Let's start there. That's what we were planning on talking about wood culture, what that means, and the different traditions of talking about culture. I mean, in the past we've made a distinction between a big expansive use of culture that you say small C culture, and then a more narrow one, big C culture, like the stuff in museums. Do you still think that's a valid way of talking? Or are those not really two different traditions?
The big change was a couple of decades ago when the popular culture and elite culture really, or classical culture, were very separate and were seen by people like Bourdieu as being attracting upper status people versus proletarians or people who are lower status in terms of culture. And the content often would have things like that as well. We're now have been having the opposites, including artists, musicians, band leaders, and so forth, mixing types of music from different kinds of countries, gongs from Tibetan nuns, mixing with electronic music and with people humming in the background, and then maybe to illustrate individualistic, a couple of people working on individualism and culture in various ways. And so we're having this kind of eclecticism, where there's one label, but much harder to say what begins, what ends, what's cultural, what's social. And many of these practicing artists are saying, to one degree, for instance, I was at a faculty workshop. A woman who came here she's a professor at the Art Institute. She's a practicing artist. She's in her 40s, whatever. And her title was, "Let's Bring Beauty Back In." That is, artists, she was saying, many of the faculty and students in the arts are now they're more interested in feminism, nationalism, being gay, fighting against it, fighting with the police, for the police, and so forth. And then what about beauty? And she also lived in Gary, Indiana, which is 97% African American, and she beautified one of the parks in a way that everyone thought it was fantastic. And so she's making the point, you don't have to have a PhD or an artist collection perspective. Low status African Americans respond to beauty. And if they do, why shouldn't students at the Art Institute? So I would say that as well about sociology. In a word, John and I have a much more expansive, vague, diffuse conception. John tends to say, that's not sociology. Whereas I never say that.
That's true. That's true.
Okay.
But I mean, the great thing is that while this is, we will argue about like what's the right way of approaching these issues. Like the ideas and the issues themselves are ones that like many of you will, and I think will enjoy grappling with, even if the question of how to do it, there are differences. So I think the thing that Erica brought up, like there's one way in which culture emerges from difference, right? And that's this sort of more expansive view of culture. So we see these ideas of culture arising with nation-state formation in Europe, and so there are different traditions here. There's this very strong German idea of what culture is. That's actually it's not quite as narrow as cultural products like paintings and art, but it is about things that can be cultivated, things that you can pursue, the parts of the human spirit that can be ennobled. Whereas there's a competing, basically I think French, but also English, right, idea of culture, which is more all the things that people in some community share that aren't physical, right? Some people would say all the things you have to know after you're born to fit in. Those are somewhat different ideas of culture, and they do seem to be provoked by adjacency of difference. You don't know that you have a culture until you see someone else. And so the more expansive view, the most expansive view of culture, it's not only due to the colonial encounter, but a lot of it is going to be formed there with these anthropological ideas of how come someone else's world doesn't make sense to me, and those worlds are being brought into violent collision. And so culture emerges in a way as, there are different, you could think of it as a problem to be analyzed. Why do people live in different worlds, subjectively different worlds? But it's also in some ways a solution, a way of stopping the regress of explaining that. There was a wonderful, I think he never published a paper by this quirky sociologist, Ken Dauber, who argued that culture is the way of ending a fruitless conversation. You say, oh, I get it, in your culture, that's considered beautiful, right? Which is like the most insulting thing you can say to someone. It's like, it's ugly and it's not worth talking to you, right? Which is not the way the terms. But like there is a way in which culture emerges when we have to rationalize things that don't make sense to us and we don't want to fight about it anymore, right? So that's in this most expansive view, and we're going to be talking about this associated with the Durkheimian school, right? This somewhat narrower view of culture as these things that can be cultivated. We're going to be talking about that when it comes to both Marx and Weber, this more German school. We're going to, we talk about those today.
Let me add one footnote here.
Mm-hmm.
One crude, simple distinction is in terms of two types of culture. One is things like beautiful paintings, sculpture, music. Second is norms and values, egalitarianism, hierarchy and respect, nationalism. These are culture too, but these are drastically different, and so they're different. They're different sublabels, but I'd say my bottom line, if you will, as a criterion is not the definition, not that we're going to say one is right and one is wrong. Our focus, I would say, at least mine and some is to try to say what kind of theory do we have? Where is there a good theory? And so what I try to look for is, and many other people, not just me. What's the process? Maybe the causes and the effects, whether or not you cross against a green light, violating that norm, or bowing to the Virgin Mary in a church, deeper because she's Christian. Okay.
Yeah, and when we started this, I was hoping that we were going to come up with a good idea of what is culture, because it's a little bit of an embarrassment to be in a field that where no one knows what it is that you're studying. So as someone who was considered to be in the sociology of culture, I didn't like it, but Terry basically convinced me, or wore me down, it depends which you say, but that that's not going to work. And instead, over the years, I think we came up with some really good questions that we want to ask, not what is culture, but when people are treating it, are they seeing it as embedded in aspects of social life in general, or analytically isolated as a separate sphere, right? Are the arguments that are being made contextualized, or are they universal and abstract? Is the analysis holistic, or is it attempting to dissect aspects of actors? And then is culture seen as internal to actors, or external to them, or both, right? Which is a real puzzle for us. And then is culture, and we're going to be going through, this is like the themes of the class as a whole. Is culture seen as something that drives the actors, possibly without them understanding it, or is it a tool for people to use in the things they're trying to accomplish? Are production and consumption, if you're okay with those words, are they seen as this, like the same thing, or are they differentiated? And if they are differentiated, is one considered to be more important, like for the sociology of culture? Are actors seen as being fundamentally active or passive in their relationship to culture? These things overlap a lot, but they're not quite the same. And they overlap with the question of, are we looking at regular people, the masses, often consumers, but not always, like when it comes to fan fiction, or are we looking at elites, the producers? Not always. Sometimes elites are the consumers. Is culture seen as fundamentally hierarchical or flat? This is, I think, something that Terry will argue is a really key distinction. Is it inside us or outside us? But also, what's the relationship between culture more narrowly defined, like painting, music, dance, and culture most broadly defined, like the thought ways and the phenomenological universes that people live in? And so I think we will be trying to give you a sense of how the sociology of culture has been working, especially as one generation responds to another, but then also how these themes get answered, or which tactics different folks take. And so we had this idea that it'll be a lot easier if we start from the beginning, talk about generations and how they respond to other generations, and then where we are now. But the specious present will be a broad present, so the generations start to blur as we get later on. Shall we talk about Marx, Weber, Durkheim, or other things? So who's read? Oh, Erica.
Sorry, this might be an
Oh no. First, always here's the other. I have to insist that you should always stop us when you have something to say, because we just will, we could just be like to each other, So and not even seeing that people are raising their hands or whatever. So raise your hand high, and if we don't see it, then you just have to be like, hey. So Erica.
Okay, thank you. Since this might be an embarrassing question, but since we're talking about investing culture chronologically, like where when was the word coined?
When was what?
When was the word coined?
So I don't know when the word is coined in different languages, but I think the question is when did the concept begin to gel in different places?
No,
right?
And I would say a huge important aspect of that is, how about in sociology at the University of Chicago in this department, which really started it with Durkheim, and those two universities were Paris and Chicago. and the huge difference was that the Durkheim and Weber and Zimmel did a lot about culture. At that point, the main thrust of the old Chicago school was to omit culture for the most part. The big theory was from Darwin, and it was the survival of the fittest. The concepts came from animals, and therefore the mind and the brain and things which include culture and a lot of what we're talking about here would not be there because they're not so central for animals. So competition, succession, domination, those concepts from Darwin were central for the famous book called Burgess and Park, called The City, and many other things there. The revolution, it wasn't a revolution. That is, there was a change in the 30s, and then culture came to Chicago in a serious way with Schills, with Warner, and a couple of others.
Yeah, Warner being a social anthropologist who was really important for sociology, So that's a question I've had though. Like, so there's a question of when does it enter sociology, and then when does the idea even get formulated? I don't know. I don't know, but I know that conceptual historians usually are going to. Or this is what my colleague Andreas Glaser says, and he's never been wrong as far as I can tell about this kind of stuff. He says that it really comes in the late 18th, if you're thinking the German tradition, late 18th century, early 19th century, with the work, Fichte in particular, giving this idea of culture as not just things that can be cultivated, but that is uniquely attached to a people, right? So in some ways it's this idea that a people has something that's in the realm of shared subjectivity, and that they can pursue it and make it better and better and better. That's a big part of that way of so what I don't know though is whether there are other ways this word is being used at the earlier that are coming in, but I think that's the story that says the very earliest use comes in the nation building, and it's the Germans who are struggling to put their nation together to say, because they've got a whole bunch of little principalities, right? And like, what holds us together? And also, they've had their butts kicked by the French, and they're humiliated. And the question is like, what do we have that's truly great, given that it's obviously not our state? And so the idea is we have this great culture, and it's tied to our language. I think most people say then it's a little bit later that you start getting this French and English idea of culture that comes from their colonial encounters. They've taken over all these places. They're trying to figure out what to do with the populations that they now control. And they're actually, so anthropologists go in, and a lot of early anthropology actually takes the form of like a user's guide to invaders. Like these are the things you've captured. This is what they do. This is what they will understand. This is what they won't understand. And that starts to be a way people start to theorize culture.
Just as we have at least Ivan here, but I don't know if you've seen a book called Natasha's Dance. It's about Russian culture, and it's wonderful in identifying the hierarchy and the thrust of what you have in Putin today. And he then links, the author links it back to regional and some very specific things, including 250 years of domination by Genghis Khan. That is, the Mongolians conquered both China and the area. There was no Russia at the time, but they dominated those areas. They kept extracting taxes and so forth, roughly 250 years, and they left a lot of residues. The biggest cities of St. Petersburg aimed toward the west, Moscow and national administration. But the third city is Kazan, and Kazan was a Mongolian, outside hierarchical aspect of Russian life, which is still there, written about, and it was ignored, totally ignored by the Russian historians until the mid to late 19th century. Then they have picked it up. But these contrasts and the things which Putin is arguing about and people are talking about in the Ukraine today, these are very emotional, deep, seriously, I mean, people are killing each other over these issues. Okay. So, but I'm just saying, this is well before, and one more in that, if you will, in the tradition of violence, is 1789 was the French Revolution. Chop off the heads of that damned elite and replace it with the people, and then Napoleon, who as a teenager had been brought by his family at Versailles, so he could learn how to be a statesman, and then the revolution came along. And then Napoleon went along too. And so he came over and basically he brought the revolutionary ideas to Germany, Austria, Hungary, Turkey, Cairo. And then not only people like Hegel and Beethoven would dedicate works to him, saying he's bringing us a new culture, we're bringing us freedom, we're breaking away from the feudal disorder of the past. So these issues are the builders. These are all active, critically important builders of culture, and they sometimes go hundreds of years before the. But I would agree with the Western main example. I agree, I guess, with Andreas. There's an excellent paper here by Wimmer on our reading list, which is on romantic nationalism as a driver of nationalism and then they have, I'll mention for those with more, because mostly we don't have a lot of quantitative analysis, but we have several of you from some of you didn't catch it, but MAPS is social science. MAC is computational social science. How many are from computational social science, just again? So, okay, these people have got real training, and I want to say we want to pay attention to you and discuss and learn. I'm learning about AI and how to use that better to study culture. Okay, and I'd love to learn from you.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think I realize another issue that we should put down, which is so Terry's definitely a believer in the importance of cultural traditions, right? And that you never really get this. You can have societies demonstrating tendencies that are rooted in long ago, and you see consistency. We're going to read some really important work, or I hope we're going to read about American political culture that makes this argument, I think, very convincingly. But that's another debate that people have. Do we see a kind of direct cultural transmission, or do we see a regeneration of the same cultural formation, not because of transmission from the past, but because of similar conditions? So if you.
But take Napoleon and the French. I mean, they wanted to destroy what was there. We want to kill feudalism and create republicanism. We don't want kings and queens at all. I mean, and we're having a little bit of that in Washington right now.
But kings and queens come right back, right? Because it's not there's something about France that's going to generate kings and queens for a while until,
Mike, I have a question. I don't know if it's really related to what you said, but I was just thinking about one more example that was in New York Times, the elementary forms of the religious life. So, and it was pretty similar about this, the example that you gave on the war and how people are killing each other for the idea. He had this example of the flag that the soldier basically is trying to carry and basically dies, and what actually struck me is that he doesn't really expand on that. He kind of mentioned that this is because of the symbol, and I find I find his explanation very short there, probably because it's not the topic of his work, but I know what are the kind of explanations of such symbols in anthropology and particularly in semiotics. And I was just curious, what is maybe Durkheim in this work not really expands on this issue? What is kind of like sociological approach to that, and maybe view of symbols, and what you mentioned?
Now, the leading figure who did that was to combine semiotics with the Durkheimian tradition of sociology was Claude Lévi-Strauss. And I studied with Lévi-Strauss, and he joined those two, and he used kinship and semiotics, and because they were developed areas of analysis, they were models, they were dynamic things which people had done better, in contrast to the simple descriptive kind of English people who just describe, quote unquote, but without any coherent analysis. So the model of how linguistic transformations, and the transformation in that is we'll go over in the course when we discuss, and John has worked a lot now with Lévi-Strauss. So yes, I mean, and with people, for instance, Michael Silverstein was a leading anthropologist here of working on linguistics. He simultaneously taught cultural anthropology or culture, and so I've participated with a number of things there. So that is, yes, people are doing that.
Let's use this though. Instead of doing starting with Marx, let's start with the Durkheimian approach to culture, and to lay out for those for whom this is new, some of the most fundamental things about that, and how it influences sociology. So Terry, since you're the expert, why don't you launch on in? So try to give you a basic sketch of what's the most important things about the Durkheimian approach and why it's been influential.
I have two documents for myself. One is identical to what John presented, going through those questions about culture, and I filled in each of the cells with different bits of the work of Durkheim. And so my first simple statement is sort of, Durkheim was brilliant. He put all kinds of things together that nobody had done before, and he then tried to both say what's new and distinctive, what is sociology, but he also tried to do this in ways that he could work with others, and he basically recruited people who worked with his journal called the Annales of the Sociological Year, the Annales Sociologie, and there were 30, 40 people who were some of the most brilliant people in the social sciences, and they joined with him from roughly the 1880s until about 1905. He got some of the smartest people in France, in the academic world at that point. After 1905, he got no new talent. There was a deep change in the ethos, if you will, the culture surrounding Germany and France. They got more and more abstract, more romantic, more nationalist, and that led to 1914. World War I, and it basically destroyed European civilization ever since. I mean, they've never been world leaders in the way that they were clearly the world leaders in 1890 and 1914. All right, so Durkheim was active not only as a sociologist, not only as an academic, as a nationalist. He taught courses on republicanism to the national. He was a speaker that would bring to Paris, so forth. He would give courses for lycée, the secondary school teachers of France would listen to him how to talk about France, how to talk about the Republic, how to answer questions about all these kinds of things, and to have the highest standards of academic analysis as well in doing our research in the sociological, the Annales Sociologiques. So he's doing basic research in social science at the same time that he's popularizing to, the general public through secondary school teachers. And then when the war came along, he was writing wartime propaganda. Okay, so let me go through, as it says in the syllabus, take a look if you want. Just glance at the list of the publications. They're English. I found a place where bibliography has English translations of all kinds of papers on all different kinds of things. Okay, then let me run through the biggest. I got five distinctive ways that he used culture. Different ways of answering the questions we're now asking. The first was in a little book called The Rules of Sociological Method. And it was a very simple, clear, simplistic kind of causal model that society hits you, and people, you don't affect society so much as society tells you how to think, your identity. You're a Frenchman, or you're a Californian, and that drives you. And so the the elementary forms of religious life, it was illustrated with things like the totem as a tiger, which the tribe shared and reinforced shared values and norms. Religion and ritual repeated for all of the tribe was seen in a strong version of the Australian Aborigines that introduced even the boy to manhood, and then they all celebrated in an orgy with drinking, dancing, singing, sensuality among all the tribe members, like names in a smaller manner of sports teams and concerts today. Okay, so that's one conception of culture. And the critics then said, how do we do this with a city in a modern society? Okay, answers. The immediate answer by Durkheim, this is point 2 here, point 1, was his book called The Division of Labor. The division of labor detailed 2 types of solidarity. The past analyses that came from the German kind of rural-urban idea, but it was generalized not just the physical location, but the sense of urbanity versus a rural localism, if you will. So the small town followed the ideas, and at least the idea of holding people together because we're all the same. And you found this with the Aborigines, and you find this in a small homogeneous town of not always, but at least more so than in a big city where it's almost the opposite. Cities, by contrast, for many were seen as atomistic. No norms. It was cold. You didn't know who was going to do what. There aren't any rules to follow, and so forth. The critiquing, as did Louis Wirth here, talked about the cold and impersonal urbanity of the city. Durkheim's answer then is do we actually see this, and what works better? And so he called it corporatism, but the term which is used today is better, professions. So the idea of the law, the doctor, the stockbroker, etc. People who have a professional identity which says these will have, say, a code of ethics, an accreditation, these kinds of conceptions, or training, or maybe you need a master's degree before you can practice, etc., etc. That these kinds of things are ways of targeting subgroups within the big, highly differentiated, divided up society of the big city, but yet giving them culture in that sense of norms in the sense of codes of ethics, what's right and wrong, and what's at least professionally right and wrong. The third kind of conception was to look not just at what I've mentioned so far, but social groups. We are all part of social groups, like the second-year students in the Max program. Okay, the social group may be more integrated when they are all together, connecting the individuals in situations, in contrast to a social group where the individual is not connected to the others as part of that group. So in a sense, Putnam's bestseller is called Bowling Alone. He used to have bowling teams when he was a kid. He went back and the owner of the bowling league said, "Oh, people are bowling alone. They're not drinking beer. They're not spending any money. They're not getting any food. And they all leave. And they just bowl alone." Okay, but why is that? Why it's a matter? Okay, I won't elaborate too much, but we'll talk a little bit. But it's Tocqueville and all of that. But the point is, this is a variable. How much are social groups of which you are a member connecting you tightly? The network analysis, the types of measures for capturing this are perfect, but he didn't have the data. He didn't have the kind of network analysis and the data of them. So what did he have? He knew northern Germany was Protestant and southern Germany was Catholic. So he compared the northern versus the southern German suicides and found that the northern Germans committed suicide a lot more than the people in southern Germany. And so that was one bit of evidence that he would then generalize that if we have, and it's the same kind of thing we have today with using the happiness survey across the Midway, with who's more happy? The classic 10 variables that are most important are having friends, having a close set of personals, such as being in a family or something like that, tend to be more happy than people who say, I don't have any friends, I don't know anybody, and I live my own life. Okay, so that's factor 3, or dynamic 3 about culture. Dynamic 4 was a debate with Tard, responding to the individual personality that adds individualism. So Tard was, in a sense, a social psychologist, and he said similar things writing about, but Durkheim agreed with many of the things that Tard said when they talked about intellectuals. So if you shift away from all the doctors have to do this, they're not supposed to cut you up. But if you're talking about intellectuals and you're supposed to be original and having new paintings or new physics papers, then it's a lot more complicated, and that is, values and norms are subtle and individualized, and prize such things as Schumpeterian breaking the bottles in order to create something new and different. Finally, number 5 is the strong state is another extreme of top-down domination, defining the values that must be obeyed, such as the Roman law areas of continental Europe. The highly detailed legal code defines the legal proper way to act, and important critical here, the magnitude of the punishment. Or do you get your head chopped off because you or others you pay $5 fee? That is, the magnitude of the punishment was a nice quantitative measure of the degree to which the society or the group imposing that, and these were usually national states in the southern half of Europe, more or less. That Roman law tradition, you have 3,000 rules, and so when we have this coming up in the U.S., and so people like Trump are now fighting against this, but the sense of regulation is now used in a widely serious way within law, within economics, for instance, which is the federalist weaker version, but in that sense, the state is another driver and another unit of analysis in which we find different kinds of rules and dynamics operating than we have in these earlier 4. So I'll end there.
Okay, yeah, I'll answer.
Yeah, I have a question. So the common theme between these factors of culture seems to be culture as a set of norms and values. Is that what Durkheim defines as culture? A set of values?
No, so I think it's going to help so I should have put that on hold, because Terry went so fast over something at the very beginning that I think we want to remind, so that Durkheim is, as Terry said, like he's like the first generation of academic professional sociologists. He's making a new science. So the people that come before him, these positivists, are replacing ideas about what makes a people, but without any evidence. So earlier ideas in Europe about what makes a people are fundamentally political ideas. You have a common leader, you have a common king, right? That's Hobbes's idea. No sovereign, no society. Then you get people, the positivists like Auguste Comte, who say, no, society is more like an organism. It exists naturally. It's not due to the presence of a leader, but because it hangs together with functional interdependence, right? And so some of those people see society as an organism, and some, like Herbert Spencer in England, see it a little bit less organismic, and they're saying we're held together by mutual need. And Durkheim, and so the thing is, like, so in France, Terry, you know more about this, so you just tell me if I start to like go a little bit away. But it seems like everyone in France in the late 19th century, they're concerned about what's holding French society together. They're concerned about solidarity, right? And Durkheim is making the argument that societies intrinsically have this solidarity, not because of common leadership, and not because of mutual interest, but because of this sharedness, this shared subjectivity, right? Now, he doesn't break it down into like norms and values and stuff like that. That's later terminology. But the key thing, right, is that just that sharedness, that we have a mind in common. He would always say, right? There's a collective mind.
Yeah, their term is the collective consciousness or collective conscience. And that's the term that got carried over and be analogous to basic values. But the point I'm making here is that that he used these ideas in 5 different ways, and that fits well for the strong state, which is trying to, and Durkheim as the speaker of the teach nationalism, yes, but in terms of the writing, when Durkheim was writing about intellectuals, we don't talk about that. So in that sense, or more in terms of modeling as a scientist, he wanted to have variation. So have variation such as the Protestants versus the Catholics, and if he had data that was more highly specifically quantitative, I mean, he'd be the first to use it. He took, just as one sentence, he worked with the top statistician in France at the time, Jacques Bertillon. And he published a book and it had lots of data. And Durkheim took those data as his suicide raw data. So he has tables taken from Bertillon. So Durkheim didn't collect any quantitative data himself, but he used it a lot, and he added a theory that gave it coherence, which I've described with the Protestant Catholic theory. Go ahead.
I just had a question on the sort of collective conscience. So you mentioned that Durkheim would use that to sort of explain a sort of shared solidarity and the cohesion within groups, and that's something that I stumbled upon like when I was reading. I was just wondering, like, did he ever think of the limits of that collective conscience? Like, how would Durkheim think about, well, this is a group with a collective conscience? Was it just very simplistic and like, oh, a nation state has like one collective conscience and another one has another one, or did he think about like it as just a continuous thing, geographically, just kind of relativistic, like you can pinpoint it here and then it sort of radiates out? So like, how did he think about the limits and groups with collective consciousness?
Lots of people ask that question and they give you a sharp, precise answer, and they usually then follow it up with criticism as what's wrong about Durkheim, and therefore you need to have something else. Whereas my answer is Durkheim did 5 different things, and they were in conflict with each other, and neither one of these is right or wrong. He was diverse, and he had as in terms of a later writer said, the cultural toolkit. Durkheim himself used many different toolkits in his, and he had 5 basic types of them that I've identified here.
Yeah, but Pierre's, you're just saying, oh yeah, well he was contradictory, as if that was like that, because Terry's an eclectic. He doesn't think it's a problem if you do things that are different as long as they're together. But I think, yeah, like Terry's saying, most people would say that's a problem, that Durkheim is not consistent, that he makes it seem sometimes like there's one group that everyone's a part of, but then other times he recognizes that there's nesting, that the family is a small society, it has its collective consciousness, and then that's nested in larger ones that are nested in larger ones. So he recognizes that that it's not an all or nothing. There are many societies, and that we have some parts of our mind are not shared. There's collective conscience, and then there's an individual conscience. But the thing that I think is so distinctive is that he isn't just saying, right, that we have these shared things, but that there have been he's not just saying that we have this shared subjectivity, and he's not just saying that that it has a moral nature, the way we might if we say, oh, that includes morality. No. He's saying that what morality is shared subjectivity. There's actually not that much difference between the fact that we all know certain rules of grammar and that we don't want to kill little babies or something. Those are both shared things, and it's right to do the right thing, and it's wrong to do the wrong thing. It's wrong to say ain't, and it's wrong to kill.
But careful, Durkheim would say, yes, that's right in small towns, but in big cities, no, that's wrong. There are many different kinds of people crossing the street in different ways. Some are running across the green. Downtown Chicago now, people are 30 miles an hour. They're going right next to pedestrians. They're on scooters. They're on motorcycles, and the police are not stopping them. The state has been weakened. So in that sense, the collective conscience of many Chicagoans is pretty weak.
Yeah, it's bad. We wanted to change that, and I think that this is also really so. First, Durkheim, he is the founder not just of a sociology but of an anthropology. And part of the interesting thing for the Durkheimian way of thinking is that he unusually, in a way, had a vision of culture that worked both like for the home and for the visitor teams. Because a lot of what was happening here is that European social science is fracturing into the Europeans who study Europeans, that becomes sociology, and the Europeans who study those that they've colonized, that becomes anthropology. But Durkheim, there's integration, and I want to say this about the morality thing. So for Durkheim, religion is in some ways the most central example of what is culture. What is that shared thing? So he doesn't use the word. That's a later word, but he would not have a problem with what I'm saying, right? That if you're interested in culture, you're interested in religion because that's the paradigm. That's the central example of shared subjectivity with its moral nature.
Not for the AMA.
Right, I'm talking about Durkheim. I'm not talking about the AMA.
No, but Durkheim is talking about, he called it corporatism, but doctors had a code of ethics. They had a way of doing it right or wrong. It was not moral, except in the highly professionalized sense.
Yeah, exactly. But it's moral. That's why the book is called Professional Ethics and Civic Morals or whatever.
Yes, but it's not shared by the whole society.
Exactly.
It's highly, but the reason I'm stressing this is the whole world has moved a lot further in the last 20 years, such as rural small towns in China. And I'm working with 15 years. I'm beginning to look Chinese. The Chinese small towns, rural areas they're doing surveys. They're using cell phones all the time, almost to the same degree that people are using in Beijing and Shanghai. So so no longer are people bowling together in a village square, playing mahjong, hanging around and talking and building the collective consciousness of the one village. Rather, these people are much more individualized, and they're using cell phones to some degree the way you are too.
Yang Yu, I know I cut you off.
It might be a little bit not relevant to the conversation about
Join the club.
Because I know that there is some kind of further development of collective memories that kind of help us kind of ideas on that one. So I'm also thinking maybe in big cities there will also be some kind of collective memories, and in that case, what kind of culture is that counting a culture, or is there any problem of that kind of thing?
If it's Pavlov as in the idea of learning, and so that is, if something you can learn and you change through the learning process, including the cell phone. Is that part of your point? I mean, I'm trying to get the bigger point which you're making.
Yeah, because the question is actually at the beginning of the conversation about Pierre's question. So, yeah, so what I'm trying to ask is about like, so in that kind of, in collective memory kind of culture, I don't know whether it counts as a culture or not, and like how it related to Durkheim. So this is like the big question here.
So maybe one way, so Durkheim, so when it comes to collective memory, there's a couple different ways people have been thinking about this. And one of them actually is associated with this German tradition, which is sort of Mannheim and cohorts, that certain age groups share certain pivotal experiences. So you guys have been marked by COVID in a way that people who are 14 years, 15 years older haven't been marked. It came at a critical time in your lives. You will all share that across the globe in some ways, right? There are tons of Durkheimians who are interested in collective memory, and this is going to come up a number of times. The way that the Durkheimians think about it is it does fit into this idea that there's a distinction between the parts of your subjectivity that are individual and the parts that are shared. And the thing about collective memory is you actually, like if the Durkheimians are right, you have in your head the same thing as the other people. So if a city has experienced something, right? Classic example, New York City with the 9/11 collapse of the towers. This makes this big impression, not just on one cohort, the way that the Mannheimians think, but on everybody, and now they all have the same thing in their head. It actually makes it easier for them to have certain kinds of solidarity, to communicate their ideas, because they have these shared things. It is, now, we are going to get to the issue of symbols and stuff like that, that becomes really important to the Durkheimians. But I stick by my guns. For Durkheim, the core, if you want to understand culture, you understand religion, and you understand religion as belief, but also as ritual practice, and involving shared symbols, things that bring the community together, things that express the integrity and the community. And so this is different from the way the Germans approach it, because in Germany, for a long time they've been thinking like, oh yeah, we have these major spheres. There's like religion, there's art, there's science or philosophy, right? But the idea that like religion and art are opposites or two corners of a triangle. They're not the same thing, right? When you study culture, it's art that's the thing that's central. Was for Durkheim. Durkheim's, we have a little bit in the syllabus because it's not quite this simple, but Durkheim's very suspicious of art in general. He thinks it could be distracting and lead people to waste their time on things when they should be working a little harder. So to him, the Durkheimian way of thinking about culture is really about religion, and the German one that we'll talk about after the break, I think, is really much more about art.
The great strength of where you could see his mind at work was in his journal, the Année Sociologique. And he read all the best stuff that came from Germany, from England, from anywhere there were people doing social sciences, broadly included. And some of that included exactly what you're talking about, but he wrote about other stuff, closer to Pavlov, closer to learning theory and psychology, all different kinds of things. And he paid attention, and if he didn't do it really himself, he then would have someone with him who really was an expert on that and would record that and comment on that to help build this new science of sociology. And that, in that sense, it was highly eclectic. Okay. But we had 2 or 3 hands up. Who's first? Go ahead.
Yeah. So I was reading this, and I was wondering, like, how would you put this into conversation with what Marx is saying? Because it seems like they have these.
This Marx.
What Marx is saying, because I think like they could have this like fairly. Yeah.
Would you allow us to hold that
Yes.
until after the break? Because then we'll talk about Marx, and I think it'll be allow you, because not everyone here is going to have read that. And we're getting close to the break. Thank you.
Two other hands up. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question about this Durkheim statement that morality is society, and I understand that he understood morality in a very broad way, including all the rituals and everything is related to kind of shared social life. But while reading that, I had this feeling that just I want to question that, especially in a way that of course, when he studies their origins in Australia, he could make this conclusion that, let's say, all this group of people are doing the common ritual, they are all, following the very same patterns of behavior, but how we would approach that, like your example that morality, for example, we're not killing the babies, that you always will find the examples of groups of society that are not following what we understand as morality, or even in this very group we will find people who are not just following that, and so they're kind of breaking morality. So I'm just curious, what was Durkheim's point on that?
No, you really raised a very powerful issue, which in a little bit of an exchange we're having here. And I would say the answer is clearest if you look at the 4 volumes on myth by Levi-Strauss. And so Levi-Strauss used so what's the unit? What's the collective consciousness? It could be the tiger tribe versus the leopard tribe versus the elephant tribe. And they may have separate fighting different values of whether or not you kill babies, or whether or not women are on the top or women are on the bottom. And so he talked then and explicitly that taking one myth, using the initially the Brazilian locals, but then taking all he could find of good field work by anthropologists around the whole world. But my simple point is, little tribes, the units of the tribe could not share collective consciousness in that sense, even if they disagree. And then the dynamics, for instance, Mo's famous book you may know called The Gift. So different tribes nearby each other would exchange once a year. They would say, "Come and we'll celebrate together, and we will give you gifts." And then the others would reciprocate, and the idea would be that if we're able to give you more gifts, you respect us more than vice versa. There's not very much collective consciousness in that. It's an exchange. It's like a market instead. So I'm simply saying there are multiple models which are going on in people's heads who are as most wrote about, and simply we don't need to have one label for one person. Marx, Durkheim, Weber, these people, they wrote about all different kinds of things, but we still have two hands. I think.
But I think you zoomed over the part that I think might, because you asked about how Durkheim would have done, right? So because Durkheim has two answers. One, and they're the exact opposite, right? One of them is that there are people who are sick. They're experiencing some kind of pathology. Durkheim relies on pathology. But the other is more brilliant, and it's that actually crime is normal. That any society has to have some distribution of people from the more law-abiding to the less law-abiding. And in a world in which nobody ever killed, they'd execute you for littering because all their moral sensibility would be shifted over. But later Durkheimians, and we're going to get to the Chicago School, I think, what they do is they do exactly what Terry's saying. They're going to say, actually, it's honor among thieves. Yes, you have people who don't agree, but that's because they have their own subculture. They're conforming to a nonconformist culture, in a way.
Yes. Who else had a hand up?
Well, so then right before the break, I think the one thing we dropped the symbol thing, right? And I think that's one of the things that becomes really important for the Durkheimians when they, later Durkheimians, using Durkheim, going to the elementary forms, is the idea that a lot of our culture is in these symbols, which is a weird thing because it's not like art where it exists or you hear it. It exists everywhere and nowhere. And the power of the Durkheimian analysis of the symbol is that the symbol stands for the group. And we're going to be able to link this to Marx because both of them use the same example of the object, the ritual object that has the symbol of the god or the tribe. To Durkheim, they're the same thing. God is your metaphoric way of thinking about the social group. And a symbol becomes powerful if it can evoke that. And so you die for the flag because the flag symbolizes the people as a whole. The idea that culture consists of these symbols and that one symbol evokes another symbol is really cool, really powerful, but also turns out to be really hard to study. And so some early sociology in the Durkheimian tradition would analyze symbols, but without feeling like you needed any particular data, because we all know, for example, that the American flag indicates the country, right? Well, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Some of these things, and as Terry's always saying, like it did then, it doesn't now. Things are changing. For some people now, the Confederate flag communicates their idea of the country. Who would have figured? Go now. Okay, so let's take a 10-minute break. Start right on in at 5 o'clock on Marx, and then at Weber. So a lot to do there.